Hi, Dallas Winston, Bloody Elbow. This is the MMA Vivisection on Bellator 125. We're going to be quick and efficient today. We're going to try that. We've been trying to quit. We know it's a scary idea. Zane, how confident are you that we can adhere to that?
I'm really confident in that because I am walking in unprepared. Today has been hell. I spilled a cup of coffee on my mouse this morning, so I had to go scrounge for one off people that live near me, and I'm barely functional right now.
You use a mouse? So are you on a desktop rather than a laptop?
Yeah, yeah.
Weird. I haven't used one of those since like the 90s.
Yeah, I was tired of having a computer that overheats constantly whenever I try to do anything cool on it.
My last computer, every cable was literally fried. It got to the point where I could smell like electrical fire every time I was on my computer. It's kind of pleasant, actually.
Yeah. At some point, it was like I only use a laptop on my desk, so what the fuck do I need a laptop for?
All right, so we're gonna bang through this bad boy, and this
Yeah.
this should be a pretty decent card. And on top of that, I mean, it's a great main event. It's one of those where, even if you're all bent out of shape and you always need some kind of meaning or title implications, and even though this might have some as far as Bellator, maybe getting to the tournament or definitely to establish a contender, it's fucking Melvin Manhoef and Doug Marshall, the Rhino. So someone's getting punched in the face. I am 100% sure. You as well? You confident in
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good, easy way to break that down. Somebody gets punched, Manhoff versus Marshall.
'Cause someone gets punched and someone else falls over. Probably
Yeah,
the
I wouldn't
same
even be
person.
confident it's one of them. Like, it could be a judge, it could be a ref, it could be a cornerman. Somebody's
Popcorn
getting.
vendor. These
Yeah.
popcorn vendors are due, I think.
Yeah.
All right, so
Okay.
as usual, we are just going to touch on a couple bouts on the undercard. Not a lot of in-depth analysis, but there are definitely a couple at least worth mentioning, perhaps worth your time. The undercard starts at 7 o'clock Eastern. It'll stream live on Bloody Elbow and on Spike.com. I didn't quite realize until late, but Chris Honeycutt versus Aaron Wilkinson, and this is the former UFC, former Tough, whatever. What was that? The Tough UK? Was that Tough 9?
Yeah.
US
One of,
versus
I
UK?
can't remember which one that was that he was on. I don't know. All the tough runs together for me now these days. It's all just sort of like he was on the Ultimate Fighter. He's English. That's all I really need to know.
Pretty good hands, good heart. I
Yeah.
kind of like, likable dude. And he's fighting Chris Honeycutt, who I believe is undefeated and training out of the Dethrone camp. So, who knows? I think he's only got 4 or 5 fights. So,
I want to say Honeycutt's a wrestler, isn't he? Is that?
I mean, it would just be a guess. I mean, the name sounds familiar, but it's probably because of his Dethrone.
I think yeah. He came out of Edinburgh University.
That
As
makes sense because Koscheck and the Dethrone, association.
yeah.
Koscheck's an Edinburgh guy.
So he was a top NCAA wrestler or a highly touted one.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if how I can't tell beyond that. I don't know what if he like won any um got into any like All American status or anything like that. But yeah, he was somebody that even like MMA fighting was interviewing and sort of pumping up over the last. Actually, he's a national. He's this year's 2012 he was 2012 NCAA National Wrestling Championship,
Are you shitting me? Was he really?
second place. So
Okay, second place, so runner up. So it doesn't.
he's one of the most decorated collegiate wrestlers to transition into MMA in the past few years.
Well, I feel like kind of a dick for not knowing that, but I'm glad you pulled that out
Yeah,
last minute.
that's
Nice
I was
work.
saying like, why is that name familiar? Oh yeah, because a couple years ago he was kind of people were talking about him as a hot shit prospect to come into the sport, and as is so often the case with hot shit wrestling prospects, he's ended up in Bellator.
Yeah, Bubba Jenkins will be fighting soon, perhaps next week too. Um, anyways, yeah, good work there. That's why we're handsomely compensated as high level analysts.
Yeah, and it actually makes Aaron Wilkinson maybe at a bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah,
Not sure.
not looking so hot for this one. He's a tough dude, mostly a striker, but not a strong grappler. So I would say just based on that simple evidence, it's gonna be a tough road for him. Let me see if they have the. Oh, actually, they do have odds for this one, and yeah, Honeycutt is just a tiny favorite at minus 565, and Wilkinson coming in at plus 375. But I do got to say, like Wilkinson's a real tough dude, the kind that will, I guess, despite the unfavorable matchup, I mean, he'll give Honeycutt, everything he's got. His only prayer is to try to pop him as much as he can, while not leaving himself too exposed for the takedown. Tough matchup, but actually now I'm fairly intrigued on that, and I'll give that one a look see.
Hmm.
Um, Poppies Martinez, who's kind of become a staple in Bellator. He's also on the undercard versus Julio Cesar Neves.
Hmm.
You know how we are with names and
Yeah.
whatnot. But to me, like the one really bright spot on the undercard, this is solid. This last season probably would have been a main card. It's Jesse Juarez versus Ron Keslar. Keslar kind of came out of nowhere. He's out of AKA and racked up two really good wins. I can't remember who the first one was. He's got like seven names. Sergio Melo Lewis Jr.
Hmm.
Really tough Brazilian. And after that, though, he choked out War Machine with the quickness, which is regardless of what you think of the dude personally, it's a pretty solid win to dispatch him that quickly and efficiently. And he's a big boy for a
Yeah.
185er. He's coming off two losses. Rick Hahn, which is understandable, but then Carl Parisian, very uncharacteristically, put him out on the feet by
Yeah, this is
knockout.
part of the Carl Parisian resurgence that is really hard to tell how legit that is. You know?
Well, the way I look at it is, regardless of level of competition or anything, there is no question that he is throwing his hands and his striking is better than it was before.
Yeah.
Now, that to what degree or whether or not that's going to even approach the veracity of his judo, I mean, who knows? But to me, there's no question he's looking a lot more comfortable and fluid on the feet. Hopefully, he
Yeah.
won't get too carried away with it and remember what his base is.
Whatever he's doing, it's working for him right now. Ron Kessler's pretty legit, and so beating him, you know, it still looks good for Parisian. I think I remember, wasn't that a fight that Parisian was losing pretty handily until he kind of
Yeah.
came out of nowhere with that knockout in the second?
Yep. And Keslar is a real big boy, really good wrestling, and he's actually been able to. His striking, I would say, is rudimentary, but really effective. I mean, to me, you can go a long ass ways in MMA with like a good grasp of basic boxing combinations: jab,
Hmm.
straight, hooks, and an uppercut. And I mean, if you can handle those and you're able to, throw them long ways. And with Keslar, he's got the long range, the reach in his wrestling kind of lurking in the background. So I think that's a good formula for him. Jesse Juarez is a really underrated guy. He's been around forever. If anyone's ever seen did you see his fight with Douglas Lima?
Uh, maybe that was
It was an
that was in
MFC,
2010.
yeah,
So
a couple years ago. But I mean,
I
I
I
hold Douglas
probably
Lehman
saw it, but I don't
extremely.
remember it.
I hold Lehman extremely,
Yeah.
extremely high esteem. I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to keep making 170. He's literally like the size of a light heavyweight. He's monstrous. But Juarez was holding his own and even kind of giving it to him a little bit. I think he ended up losing by submission there. But I think it's likely on account of Keslar coming in on back-to-back knockout losses. But he is the underdog, plus 160, and Juarez is at minus 210. I have no problem with Juarez being the favorite, but I think it's actually personally a little bit closer than that. I would put this pretty close to even, or maybe just give Juarez a tiny little nod. What do you think?
Yeah.
Is that
It
just me?
it I think that's reasonable. I mean, Kessler's, he's shown himself to be a decent fighter, but I think that he's also shown himself to not maybe be like the best finisher or the highest degree finisher. He goes to a lot of close split decisions, gets in a lot of close, scrappy fights. So he's not necessarily somebody that you can trust to go out and really take a fight from somebody every time out consistently. So on that note, I mean, I think Juarez is a lot more consistent in his wins.
Yeah, and Juarez is just a gamer. I mean, he's the kind of dude that is going to come at you really hard, and he's tough to finish too. So that should, regardless, actually be a good scrap. I mean, I see that being like a kind of a war of attrition. Um, let's move on to the main card now. We got four fights on the main card. This first one, I'm actually fairly interested in because Rafael is a former pro boxer.
Hmm.
Um, and he was unique in that he is not one of the boxers who came in thinking I can knock everybody out. I'll show all these, these MMA, tool sheds what real boxing is. He really embraced mixed martial arts right off the bat, which I mean it's really obvious, but yeah, that's done wonders for him. And he's now at Alliance MMA. He's
Hmm.
still undefeated, and he had kind of a trippy fight his last time out. He fought Nick Rossborough, who was just a real experienced, tough vet. Not like a wrestling standout, but he's been doing it long enough. Everyone thought it was obvious he was going to take Butler down, but he cracked Butler right in the jaw, right out of the gate, and Butler got dropped, went down. Rossborough swarmed, pounced on him, ended up getting back control, and Rossborough was on his back with Butler on top of him, fishing for a choke, and Butler gave him a reverse headbutt, and it was pretty blatant. And Butler admitted it and apologized for it. But either way, so that finest performance that actually ended up in a draw. To me, what's really encouraging about that is Butler, a boxer, actually relied on his wrestling and takedowns in his grappling to turn that fight around. Now, it wasn't pretty, but I mean, when you're in survival mode and you just committed a bad foul, and all of a sudden you go from looking like a hot prospect to a non-conformist as far as the rules, kind of a, you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
I'm fairly impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where it's one of the things I like that Bellator does that I mean, I understand why the UFC doesn't do more of it, but I wish they did, which is that they tend to be good about just going out and getting big winning heavyweights and throwing them together and seeing if anybody can rise out of that. Like, can we get a new heavyweight talent out of the mess of regional guys that maybe aren't exciting everyone or lighting up the stage, even though Butler's, knocking a lot of people out. But just see who can really develop. And it's still something that they do more with heavyweight and light heavyweight than I would say the UFC does. They tend to try to find just the right guy from, whatever their purpose might be.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that actually is really a perfect intro into Javi Ayala, the guy that Butler is fighting, because he's one of those guys I'm assuming that they kind of brought in um, not to win, or
Hmm.
he came out and fought Thiago Santos and then Eric Prindle and shellacked them both, finished them both via strikes, knockout, and TKO. Did you catch any of those fights?
Yeah, I remember the Santos fight. That was kind of a wild one. Santos, like, that was really like the end of his so confident that I don't really try run, because he just came out and he seemed like, oh, I can just school this guy anytime I want. And then he started to get hurt. Then he started to get desperate, and then it's just like right very end of the first round he got knocked out.
And I really, what I like about, for everything you just said about heavyweights, I mean, obviously they're known as the more plodding and kind of lumbering of all the weight classes. But what I really liked about Javi Ayala is he's a big boy, more of the round shape, real wide body, but he
Hmm.
moves really well. He's got a lot of agility and he works his hands really well, which is an immense advantage in the heavyweight division. I think he might cause some problems for Butler here.
Yeah, it should be a good, fun fight. And like I say, it's just that idea of like you just keep you keep the talent churning and you see what comes out of it. Maybe you're not going out and getting every you know 15 and 0 behemoth prospect, but you get a bunch of guys who are like 6 and 0 or 7 and 1 or whatever, and you just keep throwing them together and you see what comes out. And for a division like heavyweight that is always so weird, it is the weirdest division by far. I actually think that's a pretty good idea, just because you really don't know what you're going to get out of heavyweight.
In betting odds wise, I don't know how I want to word this, but this might be just one to keep your eyes on because Ayala is kind of like what I was saying about Rossborough. He's not like a star standout wrestler with gaudy credentials,
Hmm.
but the boy can wrestle and he's really quick and athletic and he's got quick, fast, and powerful hands. He's the underdog to the tune of plus 305. Um, so, I mean, that's a really tough matchup for Butler. I like the dude. I think he's got excellent potential. But considering that, excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. Jeez. Considering that Butler got his chin checked in that last fight, even though he turned it around well. Hell, I mean, Ayala has more power. He's got better stand up than Rossborough, and he's quicker and more agile and might be the better wrestler, too. So, I don't know. I would watch out for that one. Butler is a minus 335 underdog.
Yeah, to me, if you're talking like regional decent heavyweights that you're matching up together, you should almost never have anyone higher than like plus 200. Like you or minus 200. Like you don't know what these guys are gonna do out there. You just don't. Like you know, somebody can look great for 6 fights and then suddenly just get wrecked by some total unknown in that division.
Yeah, and
So
if you think about it, Butler has been kind of the more notable or perhaps the hotter prospect, but I mean, with Prindle and Santos under his belt, really, you could argue that Ayala's fought the better competition as well, in addition to being a bad matchup.
yeah, so it definitely should be. I mean, to me, it's a pick'em fight, and I'll be excited to see it.
Yeah, pick 'em. I might even slightly lean towards hobby in this one, but so either way, that might be one. If there's any chance betters out there, take a peek at that one. Now we're moving up to the featherweight division. Goiti Yamauchi, who came in with a lot of hype. I think his Bellator debut against Will Martinez, people lost a little hope, but Martinez was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, so not what I would necessarily call a terrible matchup, but
Well, that wasn't his Bellator debut. That was a couple
wasn't
fights
it?
in.
What was
Yeah,
his debut?
his debut was against Musa Tolliver at Bellator 99, and then he
Oh,
fought Saul Almeida at 109. So he'd actually built a bit of hype. I think that was why people were disappointed, because he'd actually started to be somebody that people were hyped about after a couple big wins, and then Martinez came in as more or less a total unknown and really took it to him.
I appreciate the correction because that was really when he fought Martinez. That was his first main card, and to me, kind of like his first showcase fight. He's looked pretty good since then, and now Stapleton came in as a lightweight, lost back to back to Syed Awad. Who was the other one that you? We,
Derek Campos.
Derek Campos. Both guys that I think are solid.
Yeah, both tough outs, really just solid, well-rounded regional guys who've been fighting well. I mean, Campos' recent loss is to Patricky Friere, and before that it's Menti, and then you have to go back to like Scott Cleave and otherwise Diego Brandao. So he's definitely a guy who's been a tough grinding out for a lot of fighters.
And Campos has been looking a lot better on the feet. I was actually really impressed with his run up until he fought Pitbull. So Stapleton to me is kind of, and I don't mean it in a bad way, kind of an unremarkable fighter, and I say that in the sense that there's not one thing that he does that really jumps out at you. He's really solid all the way across the board, real scrappy, likes to clinch, good infighter, kind of a mean guy who prefers to bully his opponents. So to me, this will be kind of a good canvas to see what Yamauchi can do. I imagine, Stapleton, even though Yamauchi's striking to me, either it's gotten better or I didn't realize that it's at a pretty decent level. Do you agree, Yamauchi's hands?
He's his. I think I would say his striking is solvable, but he's athletic enough that like it either works or it doesn't. Like Martinez had a really perfect dissection of him. It just like stunted him right there, stopped him from getting anything going. But then he came back against Richmond, who is himself been a pretty good boxer and a pretty good striker, and Yamauchi just tore him apart. So you really ended up with, he's a very a very styled fighter. He has a style that either really works against some people or it really doesn't.
I do think his stand up is serviceable enough where that you know he doesn't have to just throw one or two and get into desperation mode. I mean, he
Oh
can hang out and hold his own on the feet for a little bit before he tries to clinch up or shoot. Random fact: Richmond's going to drop down to bantamweight now,
yeah.
which to me that's going to be. I mean, I'm going to have my eyes on that. He hardly cut before, and it's going to be interesting seeing his punching power down at bantamweight now. Um, I was kind of thinking Stapleton moving down and being kind of a physically imposing guy would make it a tougher matchup. But I think Goity's actually a little bit taller. I think Stapleton's still going to be stronger and is going to have that mentality to out muscle him more. But I think Goity's overall technique and he's just a little too diverse for Stapleton. I'm thinking.
Yeah, he's a pretty naturally talented athlete. He's really fast. He's really puts a lot of snap in his punches, and he's what you say with Stapleton being really at his best inside where he can bully people. That's really also where Yamauchi's striking works best is when he's right in the pocket, slugging it out and using dirty boxing and stuff like that. I mean, that's really kind of how Richmond beat him, was he was able to stay out at range and sort of pick apart his actual technical striking at distance. So if Stapleton's not looking to do that, then this is probably going to be a pretty rough fight for him.
And that's reflected in the betting lines, minus 400 for Goity. Those I think that's justifiable, actually. I mean, I would put that a little bit closer, but this is one of those where I'm not going to make a big deal about that. And that's nothing against Stapleton. He's tough as nails. I believe he was in the Royal Marines, so he's out of England. He's a really tough dude. Um, and I think he can somewhat replicate the Martinez game plan, but he's going to look to be more physical in keeping the fight where he wants it rather than being content to play jiu-jitsu back and forth with Goity. So yeah, actually that's just a tad steep for me. I'd put it a little closer than that.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, so
I mean, like, I think it might be a bit steep, but I do think that they do have a pretty talented fighter in Yamauchi building
yep,
here.
I totally agree. And actually I should I guess do more of a range because the one I mentioned minus 400, I use best fight odds when they have kind of an amalgam of different betting odds, and minus 400 is the lowest, the highest being minus 450, and most of them are in like the minus 420s. So either way, that should be a good scrap. And if Yamauchi gets another impressive win, I mean that's really going to build a lot of solid momentum for him here.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the co-main because this one will be a don't blink classic. Brian the Predator Rogers. Actually, I believe he's going with the Professional Predator now.
Yeah, the professional predator. I'm not sure about that. That's kind of a mouthful.
And it's a little bit of an oxymoron, but I think I grasp the concept, and it's that the dude has been a walking highlight machine. I mean, to me, he had, amazing knockouts in any UFC just for flat out MMA. When he's had some humdingers, they've been some of the best of the year. And I think he's going with the professional line, meaning that he doesn't want to just be the guy who can maybe come out in 30 seconds and blow your socks off and then either lose or do something, forgettable. And I agree with him. I mean, he's at the point right now where he's got to take all those skills and move out of the box of, hey, a highlight guy, not a real threat, to be, a real threat and try to work his way up the contender ladder here. He's
Yeah.
just real quick on his opponent, and I'll turn it over to you. Making his Bellator debut, Brazilian Rafael Carvalho. He's looking pretty good. He's got one loss, and that was in his professional debut by submission. Since then, he's rattled off 9 wins in a row, and he's finished all of them by strikes except for one decision, which also turns out to be his most respectable win, which was over Zimu Machado. And he's a tall
Yeah.
dude, 6'3", really lanky Muay Thai fighter. What are you
Yep.
thinking on this one?
Well, I have to say the professional predator thing worries me, honestly. Anytime I hear about a fighter talking about how they're going to make a big change late in their career and really try and reinvent themselves, or make a major shift, it's always to me it's always a little bit like, well, you're going to go away from what was working for you. And I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, to say, okay, this is what I'm developing towards, this is what I've been working towards over my career, and how I'm trying to put that all together. Like you can see with T.J. Dillashaw going from a wrestler to a really technical striker, and if you watch his fights over from fight to fight, you can see the progression that got him there. You can see the build to that point. But with a guy who's been, being a really aggressive sort of one-off big highlight striker, really looking to be the more athletic counterpuncher in his game and go for big knockouts, to suddenly saying, I'm really going to try and dial that back and go to something more calculated and be a little more careful in my approach. That worries me. That makes me think that he's going to sit there and get hit a lot. He's going to look too much and wait too much and be too patient, or he's going to try and become a really technical striker that I'm not sure he has the chops to be. And either of those make me worry a bit against somebody like Carvalho, because I do think that Rogers is probably the more well-rounded fighter. Carvalho, from all I've seen, looks like a pure Muay Thai guy who's decided to transition to MMA. But Rogers, I mean, he's not like a real technical wrestler. He's kind of a hulking, I'll get a double leg and really put some muscle into it and throw you down and stuff like that. So if he's not going to really physically impose himself on Carvalho, I'm really kind of worried that he may not have the technical polish to outwork him on the feet.
I agree with everything you said, and to me, the emphasis is on to what degree he changes his style, because I think, you described how that might be trouble, and to me, if he found the right, balance between those two, and to me, I think he should impose himself a little more. I mean, he has got the sickest counter hip throw. Every time someone tries to take him down, they're immediately on their
Yeah.
back because he hits that whizzer and hits a hip throw. I mean, like immediately. It's fluid, it's smooth, and every time I'm like, God damn, I can't believe how easily he turned the tables there. He's, I mean, just unbelievably athletic. In like it or not, the dude has just, I mean, like massive stockpiles of just blistering weaponry. So if he can harness that and find that right balance, to me, that's going to be key. In this fight, to me, the two things that stand out are Carvalho is 6'3", but he looks like a gangly ass 6'3". So I think Rogers is 5'10". That anytime you're a striker and you're looking to find the other guy's chin, now he's going to have several more inches to navigate through, and a guy who knows how to fill that space with good strikes. And to me, the one critique I have of Brian Rogers is that from watching him in the past, you can almost see where he's in the zone. After the fight's on, he's got punched a couple times, and it's like go time for him.
Yeah.
And the problem is he's too offensive. Like he just leaves his chin open too much. He's just tearing into the guy looking to land his shots, and that's where I think he gets into a little bit of trouble. And a long, lanky striker with power is going to be the worst kind of guy to do that against.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's probably a bit of a trap fight for Rogers. It's a fight that he's the bigger name. He deserves to be favorite. He's fought better competition. He has a better record. He's got a more well-rounded skill set. But this is somebody that could walk in there and knock him out in the first round and make their name off of him.
I totally agree. And that being said, I am going to take Rogers here. I mean, I don't want to say we've been hard on him, but I think we've definitely pinpointed more of the danger zones for him. We don't know a lot about Carvalho, and really he's got one definitely respectable win over Zimu Machado, but that was pretty late in his career. So to me, I agree that he could pose danger and maybe exploit some of the things we've talked about with Rogers, but still I'm going to go with Rogers here. The lines are pretty tight. Rogers is the favorite, but from a low of -135 to a high of -160, and Carvalho is getting some respect here, +110 up to +123. I'm okay with that. If anything, this is the first time I'd actually maybe tilt it just a tad more to Rogers, but not a big deal. I can live with that. All right, on to the main event. I mean, face punching extravaganza. The Rhino, Doug Marshall, versus Melvin Manhoef.
Yep, yep.
I'm not quite
This,
sure. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I gotta say, I think that the Rhino, this is one of those fights that's really difficult because I would say that the Rhino is closer to his peak, Marshall's closer to his peak than Manhoff is to his, but Manhoff's peak was way, 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 way higher. You know, when Manhoff was at his best, he was a much, much better fighter than when Marshall was at his best. And I don't know that either of guy is not quite at his best anymore, but I think Marshall is a lot closer to still being the same guy he has been when he's been his best.
I think Marshall's pretty close. I mean, you could pretty much argue, besides his, his recent loss. What did he after Shlemenko? No, Shlemenko was his last loss. So he
Flamenco's his
racked.
last loss.
So he racked up one, two, three, four straight wins.
Yep.
Only they were all knockouts except for the split decision to Sultan Aliyev.
Yep.
So I would almost say that's this is peak. This is because no, I mean people were laughing when they brought Doug Marshall in, like literally, LOL, Doug Marshall. What does that do for a Bellator tournament? And I mean, he gave them the biggest middle finger with the biggest smile behind it, and rightfully so. I mean, I think he earned a lot of respect from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think even let me put it this way: even if Doug Marshall is not physically in his prime anymore, he's 37. Um, at some point, you start to fall off a little. You start to lose a step. It seems like he's carried his game incredibly well, and he's maintained his power kickboxing style really well. Like he's got his timing is incredible, his accuracy is fantastic. Even if he's not always the most technical, purely technical kickboxer, he just, he has that ability to find your chin and find it with power. And Manhoff also has all that ability, but you look at the guys that he's been competing against lately. You look at it just feels like he's not quite at the same level as Marshall right now. And I think it's just going to be an all-out war of whose chin gets cracked first. And it, I think that Manhoff has more of a chance of getting knocked out.
So and this is obvious, but it should go that Manhoof is going to have the technical advantage. I mean, easily one of the
Yep.
most technical kickboxers. Like, I would always say with guys like Overeem, guys who carry a lot of, respect from his kickboxing and K1 accomplishments. Alistair Overeem fights nothing like you'd expect a professional kickboxer in
Yeah.
MMA. Manhoof is a guy who does. I mean, high volume, picture perfect technique. He mixes up his combos. He goes in opposites, like right low kick, left hook. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
technically, I mean, almost as good as it gets. The other thing to me that's interesting, and that's not, I mean, to me, Marshall he's technical, but to me, his strength is just pure efficiency. I mean, he will find your chin and he will put you out once he gets there. Another thing that's kind of interesting to me, and I had to look this up because I could only remember one stand-up fight ever that Manhoof lost, which was, of course, the classic Robbie Lawler
Yeah.
knockout after Manhoof was seriously putting it to him in a
Oh
bad,
yeah.
bad way. I mean, that's as close to a Hail Mary comeback knockout as it gets, and obviously we've seen what Robbie Lawler has progressed or gone on to do. So the only other knockout losses he has were really early in his career, '03 and '04, and they were to excellent kickboxers, Rodney Glunder and Dirty Bob Scriber. So
Yep.
really, Melvin's going to have, on paper, the better chin. Um,
Yeah. Except partially too though he's been he just got knocked out in a kickboxing bout or at least close to it. And I think he's been on a pretty bad streak in his kickboxing career lately. Yeah, he's lost his last 6 fights, having been TKO'd in 2 of them. So it's just one of those things. Like I don't know. I think it's a very much a toss-up fight, and it's two guys who both have pretty iron jaws, who both hit like a truck. Manhoff is the more technical. I think Marshall is closer to when he's been at his best. and I really don't know how to call. I'm leaning Marshall, but God knows what I'll actually see.
I would actually like Marshall to win this, but I just looked this up and I didn't realize it. The Rhino is 18-7. Of his 7 losses, 6 are by KO or TKO. So
Yeah,
that does not bode well. And that's where I think Melvin's technique really becomes an advantage for him, because if this is a race to see who can find whose chin first, the guy who's throwing laser straight punches and flowing from one combination to the next. So I would have to begrudgingly, with my head, say that Manhoof should have some kind of advantage here. Slight, medium, maybe even large in some people's eyes. I would give him a slight advantage, and heart-wise, I really would like to see Marshall win this one, man.
this is what I would say if I were to to try and really like to predict this fight down the line. There are two things that are intensely likely. One is that Manhoff comes out and just absolutely destroys Marshall in like a round. Just goes out, lands 20 punches, over and done, like that. And the other thing that's very likely is that these two guys just go out and start trading blows one after the other, and Marshall cracks Manhoff and hurts him in the middle of it, or Manhoff cracks Marshall and hurts him in the middle of it, and you have no idea who's going to win at any second.
Beyond trying to predict it, the good thing is there are not many scenarios that won't be pleasing from a fan, from a fan standpoint. One thing comes to mind now, and that's I think that Marshall has really done well being the better striker against guys who are good to medium strikers, and this is a time where now he's fighting an elite striker in any and all, I guess context of the word, kickboxing, MMA, whatever. I'm curious if he might actually shoot a takedown here, or maybe not
I mean,
go that far,
Shlemenko
but
kind of tore him down in that same in a similar kind of matchup.
exactly. But that body shot was so nasty.
Yeah. So I
Mm-mm.
think this is just going to be a brawl, and it's either going to be Manhoff just totally tearing Marshall down just like Shlemenko did, or it's just going to be this war of you know chin checks.
Actually, it's kind of interesting because I'm curious how Marshall will approach this, because he can either bum rush Manhoof and try to make it a brawl, which would make sense when you're facing a guy with better technique, or whether he might hang back a little bit and try to see what Melvin's going to do. Because I would guess Melvin will expect and will be more comfortable with Marshall bum rushing him rather than Manhoof being the one to try to take the initiative.
Marshall just doesn't strike me as a hang back type of dude. Like
I
I
know.
can't think of many Marshall fights where he's like, "Yeah, I'm really gonna counter punch and wait and see what this guy's gonna do." It's usually just like, "I've got my hands at my hips. I'm gonna put my chin out, and I will dare you to hit me while I throw down on you." I mean, that's very much Marshall's fighting style.
Yeah, and again, risky for him, but I mean, great for the fans. So I guess that's
Yeah.
the biggest thing to take away from this. So, all right, we did pretty well time wise. We're gonna wrap it up. You got any final comments, words of
Should be
wisdom?
a fun card. Honestly, it should be fun. I don't see any fights that really look like they'll be on the main card that look like they'll be ugly. It should be interesting and pretty solid.
Yep, should be a beauty. So I'll be doing play-by-play for this one. Come join us over at Bloody Elbow. Zane Simon is at the Zane Simon on Twitter. I'm at Uncle Justice. Nate Wilcox always says, "Give us a like on YouTube." This is how you do it.
Yeah, yeah. Down. Give us a like down below.
Down
Thumbs
below.
up down there. Yeah.
It's a lot of directional chaos, really. But all right, thanks. Good show. Let's just wrap it up before we say anything else stupid.
All right. Adios.
All right, thanks everybody. Later.